Okay, now we seem to be underway again.
Is
Um,
there a way to know that it's functioning properly as we go along?
yeah, well, so the main problem is your voice isn't going to be as loud as mine. But I
Right.
mean, I can see, there's a record level thing that's showing me that we're each coming through. But when I speak,
Okay.
it's much louder.
Great. Okay. Keep a watch on it. And one time I lost a whole big, beautiful interview with somebody. They were very unhappy.
Uh,
But so this sounds good. And uh, are we recording now?
yes, we are. We are.
Well, why don't I just say that for the record that this is Tony Martin, and in the '60s I was often known as Anthony Martin, and I want to first of all thank you for doing this, you and others for doing this project. I think it's an important project to restore that place, Roger Summer's wonderful hilltop, and I want to thank you also for sending me the links of your conversation with Garrett and for having me be on board here to give some insights and thoughts about that great place. Shall I just talk a while and then we can have a conversation more back and forth?
Yeah, yeah. Why don't you do that? And I have some questions and stuff, and you'll probably cover some of the things that
Right.
I was going to ask.
Okay.
I think that's a good way. I mean, that was kind of, you saw what Gerd and I did in that one thing.
Right.
So he
Okay.
he gave us a few minutes, and then
Right.
yeah.
Great.
So
Okay.
go
Well,
go ahead.
I'd like to say that that place was one of the most sensually stimulating places I've ever been, and all of my senses were activated by it. And being there with other people was inspirational for me, especially in making a kind of large piece that I was commissioned to do by Anna Halpern. And being there I called it Frank's Valley, I think. It was Roger Summers' place in Frank's Valley. I'm not positive of that,
You're
but
right. That's one
that's
way to
correct.
call it.
Okay,
Yes.
right. And the Druid name came later, obviously.
Yes.
Well, I was first told about it, I think, by Barbara Summers, because I first met her on Telegraph Hill at Peter King's house, where he would have a kind of a Sunday salon. And uh, Barbara invited me to go over there and gave me the directions. So one day I drove over in my GMC truck, I think I had at that time, with all my tools, because I was also trying to earn some money with carpentry and my musical instruments. But I was mostly a painter and a multimedia artist, and I was living at 136 Embarcadero, which was a great loft, and I built a lot of pieces in the very early '60s and did a lot of painting there in that loft. Well, at any rate, Barbara invited me to go over, and I drove from the Embarcadero, and then finally, being in Mill Valley, I went up this very curved dirt driveway up to the little plateau of Roger's place, and right away I was taken with the smells and the sights of the place. The eucalyptus smell mixed with the various pine odors, and the redwoods were nearby in Muir Woods. Somehow there was the smell of honey, and that may have been, I don't know, lupin smells like honey, but there were wildflowers all over the top of this rise, and the blue lupin, purple blue lupin, was very beautiful, with a lot of bushes and some scrub weeds, a lot of interesting weeds. Anyway, the light was coming through the blue gums and bouncing warm and cool light all around, bluish and orangish and greenish from the blue gums, and there was a constant movement of shadows, and all of the, I just felt right away that there was some magic there, and I felt I was in a magical place. It was a place of strong environmental poetry, you could say. The sound of the wind would come through because it was in that area where the Pacific wasn't all that far away, just maybe 5 miles or so. And then also the resonance of sound and strings and sounding boards, which I found the source ultimately when I went into the house, that there was a koto in there, and there was a piano harp, the whole inside of the piano mounted in the wall, and I plucked these right away because I was mostly into stringed instruments when I was a musician. I was a musician that turned into a painter, and so I was immediately taken with this amazing proportions of this somewhat Japanese style enclosure, and realized that somebody was a great craftsman. Well, that somebody was Roger. And first I met Barbara there, and then I went in and met Roger. And we got into a wonderful conversation, mostly about carpentry and wood and smells of wood. And we talked about sitar music and tambura, Indian music. I had built a sitar myself in the mid-50s, and I loved Indian music, and Roger did too, and Barbara was in love with it. So that was a kind of a compatibility right away. The environment being that perfect feeling of the Asian, mostly Japanese influence, the shoji screens, combined with Roger's really good knack at proportioning openings, spatial openings, and the round window, and looking out in the interesting places to see different parts of the environment through the openings. The table struck me right away. It was a beautifully made Japanese type table where you put your feet, your lower legs underneath, under the level of the floor, and you sit on cushions. Well, I just enjoyed absorbing the good feel of those woodwork and the smells of the wood. There was some redwood, but also other natural woods, mostly local. And Barbara gave me some celery sticks and a little bowl of yogurt. And I remember that it was the best yogurt I ever tasted. She made yogurt all the time. And she made combinations of Japanese and Mexican food so expertly. She had her own way with putting together food. And she talked in a kind of a clear and considered voice, slowly, and spaced with a kind of a wonderful silence and a kind of an intaking of breath, which really was unique to her way of communicating. And I was struck with that as well. Meanwhile, Roger was very kind of easy to talk with, partly because we had mutual experience with music and with woodwork, because I was earning money anyway doing odd woodwork around. I built bookcases for Victor de Souvero, Mark's brother, in Sausalito, and stuff like that. So anyway, we could talk about wood and tools, and that was enjoyable. So I spent maybe, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 hours there, and I met another guy Jerry, I think his name was, who lived in a house nearby, like 300 feet away. There was a smaller house and tools, part of a shop. I think it was also Roger's shop, but a guy was living there as well, and I'm forgetting his name. He was, I think, was partly an assistant to Roger in building that so-called Twin Peaks house. We went for a walk around, and Roger showed me different parts of the rise there, that little plateau, and we talked about various things. We talked about environmental oriented religions like Buddhism, and we talked about a lot of things Asian, but also some mention of Western stuff. I mean, he was almost to me like a guy from Chicago. I went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and somehow he felt kind of I don't know, a little bit. I don't know where Roger was from.
He was from Chicago.
He was?
He went to University of Illinois, anyway.
Unbelievable.
Yes.
I didn't know that. I just said that now because there was some connection there in just the way he communicated that I was comfortable with. Only now do I know that he was truly from around there. That's interesting. Anyway, there was a hibachi out on the grass, and they obviously did a certain amount of cooking on that. There was the wood stove inside, and so I just spent a wonderful 3 hours maybe there that first time, and then went back home to the Embarcadero, and then not long after that, Barbara phoned up and asked if I wanted to come by because Alan Watts was going to show up, and somebody was going to bring some of Housley's first made acid, and I wasn't really too interested, and I was a little scared of things like that at that time. So I said, well, yeah, I wanted to meet Alan Watts because I thought he was interesting and joined up west and east in an interesting way. So I went out there, and I was on the early side, I think, so I walked around some more again. And then there were these little pills that some people had taken. There were about half a dozen people. And Alan was there a little bit later. I can't really recall who the other people were, even though everybody knew Varda, the guy who lived on the houseboat in the Sausalito. I don't think he was there, but he was connected with some people who I think were there. So I'm not sure. Anyway, I felt comfortable again talking to Alan Watts a little bit when he got there, and I finally, after a lot of reticence, I took one of those pills, and I had a very wonderful, easygoing experience. It wasn't horrendous in any way, and I had spent a lot of time there unaltered in any way, even though I knew there was marijuana around. You could smell it here and there now and then. So I ended up climbing trees a lot, and I learned even more about the environment because I could climb the eucalyptus trees, and that pill helped me to climb with no fear, I have to say. And it was a little bit dangerous. One time I swung down and like a monkey and just latched onto the next branch down, which was probably 6 feet away, and comfortably rocked back and forth, and then onto the limb. I'm not sure I could have done that without that altered sense of everything's going to be okay, So, that was an interesting encounter with with Alan Watts and other people there, and everybody, whoever was there, I think, responded to the polysensory, I would say, all the senses functioning at once, that synesthetic feeling that I was into, because I was starting to make multimedia pieces using projection equitment, and I would modify slide projectors and overhead projectors and 16 millimeter film projectors. And I got involved with the San Francisco Tape Music Center. I was kind of the visual end of that with Pauline Oliveros and Mort Subotnick and Ramon Sender. And I'm not sure if Ramon was there at Druid Heights in the beginning time. I think he was there later on. But I don't think he was there in the time I was there, which was really 1960 and 61, very early on. And, well, I don't know, early or whatever. Those were the years where I was first there. And I had not met Garrett yet. I met him later at the Tape Music Center when Michael Callahan was our technician and builder of, putter together of electronics. So, there were a lot of connections between us all, and I think I should mention right away about this polysensory sense of the whole space and people in it. Anna Halpern commissioned me to make a room-sized piece for a festival at the San Francisco Museum of Art on Van Ness. And as Garrett said, it was in the Civic Center at that time. And the people in power there were really generous, good people. So I had a whole room to deal with, and I went to my studio on the Embarcadero and built a 20-foot diameter spiral maze out of theater flats and wood and rubber and different materials. And there was a swing in the middle that was mounted on harp strings that you sat on. If you were heavy, it sounded high. If you were light, it sounded low. And that moved a pantograph, 1x2 construction that made pencils and different things move entirely in an entirely different part of it at the front of the play, or the beginning part of that spiral journey that people took when they went into it. You could open windows here and there and look out into another part of the spiral or out toward the outside and see other people. They would surprise you by opening little windows. There was a word wall where you could write down poetry or words, and I went in once a week and ripped off some of the paper and put new paper on top, trying not to harm people's linear succession of words being written on a wall, one of the walls of one of the panels of the spiral. And that was called the Theater for Walkers, Talkers, and Touchers. And there's almost no documentation, unfortunately. I would love to have a dozen pictures at least. There's a couple of not very good photographs. There's a sketch that I made when I went home no, that wasn't immediately connected in my mind, actually. That's something interesting to maybe think about. At any rate, that's what the piece was, about 20 feet diameter spiral. He spiraled into it. Obviously, it was not electronic. It was used even no electricity. It was all manual, functional, things you could move with your hands. There was a touch keyboard just for the sense of touch. You would use a key and it would be drawing a string with a bolt across sandpaper, and there was another one that was doing some other texture. So it was a piano keyboard kind of thing that was only for the sense of touch. Now, when I think about that now, for all those years, I never really made that connection very strongly, partly because I was so much into that kind of feeling and thinking anyway. Um, that the mixed media and mixed joining the senses together in one, being conscious of all the senses in one piece. It's only now that when I look back, I can see how that experience influenced and inspired me in making that piece.
Your visit to Rogers.
Yes, my visit to Rogers inspired me and excited me, and partly nurtured that large environmental installation that I made basically in the same period of time. So I'm just saying that Rogers Place and the people there, and Barbara, and the way people were around with each other, interacting, because this was an interaction piece that I was making for viewers to interact with each other in that spiral maze. That was the point, and that's what was happening at Druid Heights to a great extent. It was magical in that way. So, at any rate, that's one thing that came was a strong thread and kind of enforced my spiritual nature and my physical, sense of things. So that's pretty much my monologue there.
Well, that's great. That's great.
Yeah. Maybe we can converse a bit. You could ask me some questions.
Yes, and I'll fill you in on a couple of things. It was Jerry Walters, who was out there, and he worked with Anna as well.
Right.
As I guess, I mean, he's listed on her troops trips where they'd go abroad as sculptors. So I take it that meant building sets and things.
Yes, absolutely. Now I'm remembering. He was there in Kent Woodlands a number of times when I was also.
Right, and I can't remember. I'm in touch with so many people, but I've spoken with Anna, and she also is very enthusiastic about what we're doing, and she wrote me a letter saying how important the place was for her too. Especially, she later did some work there with their troupe with James Broughton. I don't know if you.
Yeah, sure. I know.
Yeah, so
James.
So he did a couple of films out there, and one of which, The Bed, a number of Anna's dancers were all in. So that was important to her. And I believe Jerry was the one who put the piano soundboards. I believe there are 3 out there. I've seen 2, but I believe there are 3 inside in 3 different buildings. So that was his contribution, as I've been given to understand it. Franks Valley. There are a number of different names for the place. Druid Heights came from Roger's, neighbor Elsa Gidlow lived in the other house there, down a little lower, and and she and Roger and his first wife were the ones who bought the place. Yeah, so.
Is it Gidlow?
Gidlow, yes, and she's she's interesting for many.
I remember she was there that. Both times I was there, she was there.
Yeah.
I mean, I was there more than twice. But what was her first name?
Elsa.
Elsa?
Yes, yeah. Elsa. Yes. Okay. So, yes, she.
I'm remembering now her. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, and Druid Heights is really probably best thought of as what she called her own personal home there, in her portion
Oh,
of the property, but it eventually it was such a, I guess you could call it a catchy name, that it has become what the whole place is now known as
right.
over the years. So sounds like you did go there other times, for other parties or gatherings.
Yeah, over the years, I was in the San Francisco area from 60 to 67, and well, 59, from 59 to 67. And I ended up doing most of the visual compositions with the Tape Music Center on Divisadero Street, and I worked with Anna Halpern, helping her in some of her physicality of the dances. It's me who brought the cargo net to the land there, to the woodlands. It became that use of that in that famous piece, Esposizione, where she and her and the two guys, my names are going bad. Anyway, the whole troop went over this cargo net. Well, I had mounted that cargo net, I think with Jerry's help, at Kent Woodlands, but I brought it from, I think I picked it up in San Francisco and brought it over there. Anyway, just to make another connection. So the other time, I guess what I was trying to do here is to say that in 62 and 63, I would occasionally just drop in there because I would be sometimes working in Mill Valley or nearby, and it wasn't hard just to drive over to Franks Valley and drop in. And I think I didn't do it without knowing it was okay, but so there were times after I was involved with the Tape Music Center, and then I was the first light show at the Fillmore West with Bill Graham. So I did the first light shows with the Grateful Dead and the Jefferson Airplane, and Them and the Who, and it wasn't the Who yet, but Muddy Waters, and did the blues concerts, and so all those early light shows were made by me, kind of on my own. I was a one-man visual band, you could say, and that was basically, that was to make money to survive in my Embarcadero studio. So that's basically why I was doing that, and of course it became so famous. I kept my name off of those famous posters because I didn't want to be known as an entertainer.
You read my mind.
I
was going to ask you that about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I really wanted to be a painter who had a sturdy reputation in painting and drawing and printmaking or whatever, and so I was worried about that. But it was great. I mean, I enjoyed every minute of it. Not every minute, because sometimes it went on too long. It was hard work. It was hard work to do that. There is a BBC, another company, and that made a short film, and it shows me doing my projections with the Jefferson Airplane. You can see that on YouTube.
Okay. Great.
Hold on. My wife's name right now is Margot, spelled with a T, and I'm going to ask her, Margot, can you tell me the name of that the Jefferson Airplane song that you can find on the YouTube? It'll come right. The clip is It's No Secret, that famous song.
Yes.
Right? So it's just a glimpse of me. It's not the whole clip, but you'll see me and you'll see my unique way of using liquids. A bearded Tony Martin. I don't have a beard.
Okay, good to know all that, and I like to because we have a Facebook group that we put a lot of stuff on. I'll try and find that and then and link that, and I'll often capture a still shot out of something that I'm going to put up. So I'll see if I can get you with the beard there, and with the link for people to see that. But,
right.
Yeah.
So I used once in a while in the mid 60s. Not too much. You know? And that's pretty much my whole time span with Druid Heights.
Yeah.
Most important to me was I had a show at the Batman Gallery. You know, there's a woman, Laura Whitcomb. Do you know her?
Laura Whitcomb, yes. I met her at the...
She was just here interviewing me.
Okay, great. Yes.
And she's terrific, by the way. And
I've met her.
Yeah, well, she might be useful. You might be useful to each other, you know, for information. Anyway, she's going to be doing a project on the Batman Gallery, and I had 2 one-person shows there at the Batman, and in 61 and 64. So that's just a little rounding out. Do you have any more thoughts you'd like to get to? I know you're going to have to be rushing off to get to the big city.
Not too soon. Yeah, you know, I will get to meet Ramon tonight.
Okay. Ramon's, yeah, I know. He told me he'll be there at the birthday party, whatever.
Yes. So I'm looking forward to meeting him. And but
no, I have not met.
No, I don't have to go. I have to leave around 5 o'clock your time. So
okay.
I have plenty of time. Yes. Okay. Were you ever out there at Rogers when he had any of his musical gatherings out there?
Actually, no. I don't think so. Maybe you could mention one. What would be the earliest real gathering of music?
You know, when I would guess it probably must have started in the 50s. I mean, Roger, from all accounts, had a very magnetic personality, and he must have, you know, he hung out with everyone, you know, in the scene at the time. And, you know, and so, of course, we hear how, you know, Dizzy Gillespie was out there. People would come out there after hours, but, you know.
But probably Harry Parch went over.
Yes, I'm pretty sure Harry did. Yes.
Yeah. Right.
Yes, and you know, Roger was, you know, from so many people I've heard what a magnetic personality he had, and so many people enjoyed his company.
Right.
You know.
The times I was there was a little more improvisational. There was a lot of music, but it was a mixture of some tape recordings and records and people playing the instruments that were around in the house. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that seems to have been something that happened a lot, and I think, you know, a lot of things were just people would show up. It wasn't like maybe in an organized gathering. Just somebody would be in town, and they would go to Rogers after sometimes even after their gig, or the day before or after, and so.
Well, that was one of the great things about that environment and about Roger and Barbara, as I knew them, that it was a very free spirit that was happening there, you know, and it was not formalized very much. And does that mean your recording is still happening?
Oh yes, it's still. Did it make a noise? It's still rolling here.
That's good. So anyway, you know, I can't even remember if I ever called there. Barbara phoned me. Barbara used to visit me later on at the Embarcadero Loft. So I knew some things. You know, she would tell me some things about stuff going on.
Right.
So it truly informal in a certain way, but it had a undercurrent of poise, I would say, and the formality of spiritual quality, you might say. You know, there was a thread of formality that was more Zen. I could say that. Oh, Gary Snyder. I think I was there once when I was there.
Oh.
And,
well, Gary reportedly helped Roger for a bit build that very Japanese style rooms. He was living just over the hill in Mill Valley one or two times, and he got up there. He and Roger had met on Varda's boat, and then Roger needed some help up there. And according to one of my sources who lived out there towards the end of Roger's life, Roger used to like to tell the story of how he and Gary would be working and they had Dave Brubeck's Jazz Goes to College on the turntable, and they listened to it more than once. More than once.
That's right. You're reminding me, he loved Brubeck. And I had rented a space to Jim Weeks in the Embarcadero Loft. He was an excellent painter in the Bay Area, and Jim Weeks was painting a large painting of Brubeck at the piano. A beautiful painting. Anyway.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting to hear too that you said that they were very into Indian music. I had suspected that, just given the overall era and the interests of the time, and Ravi Shankar's recordings and others were coming out. It makes sense. I hadn't.
Alexander.
Yes, I didn't know that they had a Kodo out there. That's something new.
Somebody could have brought that. I'm not saying that they had that there. I just remember seeing one there one time.
Yeah.
Not to say it was part of the household.
Well, Roger supposedly had quite a collection of instruments. I did learn that at one point some were unfortunately stolen many years later. And that was a very painful experience to him. But yeah, that was. Wait. Oh, what was the name of the artist again? You said where you and Barbara had met. I believe you said at his salons.
Telegraph Hill.
Yeah, and what was his name?
Oh, Peter King.
Peter King.
He was a guy who was into medieval music, and we'd go there, and he'd have the best possible early Renaissance. I shouldn't say medieval. Early Renaissance music. But the whole time of people visiting there on Telegraph Hill, he'd be playing the best possible recordings of Renaissance music. And so he wasn't a visual artist. I don't know. He was mostly, I think, a writer and maybe poet. I'm not sure. I didn't know him I knew him pretty well in those times, but I didn't know much about his life in general.
Yes.
And but Francesca Green and Johann Schellenrod were two people who lived in the same building. And he was an artist. He was a sculptor, and she was a painter.
Yeah, the times when an artist could afford to live on Telegraph Hill.
That's right.
Without a trust fund.
I know, it's crazy now. That whole city is transformed.
Yeah, it's
sadly.
Yeah, it's success.
Ramon is a good holdout though there in Noe
Valley. Yeah, I'm gonna have to tell him tonight. We were neighbors at one point. I lived there for a few years, just probably a couple blocks, I think, from him. But I was born in '59. No, that comes around to my question. Next question is: so you were fresh out of college when you came to San Francisco, I'll guess.
Yes, I never finished. I first went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and I did not finish it. Second year, I went on to Chicago. I wanted to be in a city. I didn't want to be in a college town, and that's where I started to paint in Chicago. And went there only for 2 years. I got kind of a moving bug, and I didn't want to go back east where I grew up. I grew up in a kind of almost an artist community, also resonant of the communal feelings I was finding in California, but a small town in New Jersey called Roosevelt, New Jersey. It was a WPA sponsored in the beginning, and all the houses were designed by Louis Kahn.
Wow.
Very simple. Yeah, very simple. just cinder block, flat roof. The windows went down to the ground. That's the house I grew up in. So in a way, I was used to an unusual environment, and I was used to musicians because Woody Guthrie would come to our house.
Wow.
And the Weavers, Pete Seeger,
right.
and Mary Lou Williams gave me a piano lesson once on my guitar. Mary Lou Williams, who taught so many of the jazz musicians in the early 40s.
Wow.
That was an honor. My father was a known illustrator of jazz people. His name was David Stone Martin, and he drew all of the important jazz record covers of the 40s and the 50s.
Wow.
So he would bring home, not only that, he brought home Ray Brown's bass for me. Because Ray Brown didn't want his old flat back bass. So he said, you could take this to your son. I know he's making a lot of music. So I was studying classical guitar. I actually played concerts of classical guitar. And that's where I began. And then it went into jazz. And then jazz, I was playing at Princeton, a band called the Nassau Jazz Band. And we went to Europe with that band. And then finally, to answer your question, I went back to Chicago and had a couple of wonderful early painting years. And I love Chicago. And I built a sitar while I was in art school.
Oh, wow.
And I was, as you can see, a little bit inspired to not go back to New York City.
Yes.
I lived in the city and also in that town in New Jersey. So
right.
I didn't want to go right back there after the Art Institute. So I went west and ended up in a little apartment with my companion at that time. Her name was Olivia Huntsman Trout, and up on 17th Street, Twin Peaks. Had a great little apartment with flowers on the back stairway, the way they did in those houses. The whole.
Oh yes.
The whole back would become flowers on it. You couldn't use it as a fire escape because it was too full of flowers and trees. So that started my wonderful 8 years in the Bay Area. And indeed, I went there that way in '59 when you were born. Started to really get into the feel of that somewhat Asian American city.
Right. Well, and it sounds like the unique environment of arts environment of San Francisco at that time. If you hadn't come there, your career might have gone in a very different direction.
I think it would have. I would have come back into the happening era of Caprow and stuff like that. That would have been good, and the Fluxus people. And I finally became friendly with Nam June Paik pretty much, and people from Fluxus. But if I'd come back, I would have gotten involved somehow in the downtown artists, and but it would not have been the same. It wouldn't have had the free-minded, free spirit and openness. Because New York, as you know, is a very pressure cooker.
Right.
And I didn't want to have that my whole life. So in San Francisco, I learned some other kinds of mentality and spirituality and physicality. It was just different and very nurturing of my work. The way I did multimedia was different than a lot of the ways people did it here. A little bit more organically involved, and although there are a lot of people I was very similar, especially in filmmaking and video making, but I didn't want to become a video artist, for instance, professional video artist. Like Joe Viola. Um, uh, I just wanted to use multimedia in a more open-ended way. If you go to my website, have you gone to my website?
Oh yes, I've been.
Okay.
I posted a link and to your more recent piece that you did at performed at the Whitney on our Facebook group.
Great. I'm glad you saw that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a piece that I think was very successful. The video of it is not perfect, by the way. There was a little stretch of light coming through the setting sun in the back, but it does reveal my drawing with light in the first part, and the second part, the spatial thing, and that's partly from that influence too, the space of the environment on the West Coast, the spatial volumes of different kinds, large and small and infinite. That was important to me, and that piece at the Whitney, I really could make use of that. Those hands that you see in space were recorded from a piece called The Well, and that piece was shown at Howard Wise Gallery on 57th Street in New York in 1968, and that's just after I got back. I started building environmental light sculptures, and I built another piece called The Game Room, which really was an electronic and projection version of the Theater for Walkers, Talkers, Touchers from the Anna Halpern Festival.
Right.
So as soon as I got back to New York, I was making use of all that Bay Area stuff in a way,
Right. Well, it's interesting to me too that both you and Garrett, kind of went through this phase in San Francisco Bay Area, and then you both headed back east where you were from, and then did different, but in some ways, given the times and everything, you were into these whole experiential,
Exactly. We were both affected by that.
Yes.
Yeah, we brought back the blood of the Bay Area, and that's true.
Right. So, I mean, in a sense, from what you've said today, I mean, that experience you had at Rogers out there at what we think of as Druid Heights now, I mean, that was kind of like you were on the edge of a pond and this pebble got tossed in, and then you kind of rode the waves, or you learned something about the waves out there that you incorporated into your work. Yeah.
That's a good metaphor.
Yeah. Just trying to think. Anything else we'd like to know, or I mean, yeah.
I think we have a pretty good recording here. I hope it works.
Well, the meter makes it look like we're getting pretty good bounces of volume there and everything.
If you do make some copy right away, that would be great if I could have a copy. I don't need the copy right away, but as soon as you are making something like that, I would love to have that.
Oh yes, I'll definitely get that to you. I'm gonna. Go ahead.
Do you make art, or?
Well, I'll go back into. I was going to say earlier, and I lost my thread, that anybody who can build a musical instrument is a good woodworker, and I say that as a person with some training and experience as a woodworker myself. But to build an instrument, that's kind of chairs and instruments I shy away from the thought of, because of maybe chairs, but an instrument I can't really. Well, yes, I could